What if I told you that the exhaustion you feel is not a failure of discipline, not a lack of willpower, not a character flaw that you need to fix with another productivity system or morning routine or self-help book, but something far deeper, far older, far more sacred? What if I told you that the heaviness in your chest when you wake up, the resistance you feel toward tasks that should be simple, the way your body seems to refuse the life you've built? What if all of that is not laziness at all, but a kind of spiritual fatigue that comes from carrying a version of yourself that was never truly yours to begin with? Sit with that for a moment, not as an idea to understand, but as a possibility to feel into. Notice what happens in your body when you consider it. Does something soften? Does something tighten? Does a part of you want to dismiss this immediately, to return to the familiar story that you're simply not trying hard enough? Or does another part of you, quieter, deeper, older, does that part recognize something true in these words? Something it has been trying to tell you for years through the language of tiredness, through the dialect of delay, through the grammar of giving up. There's a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can touch. You know this exhaustion. You have felt it on Sunday evenings when the week ahead stretches out like a landscape you no longer recognize as your own. You have felt it in conversations where you hear your voice saying the right things, performing the appropriate enthusiasm, while something inside you watches from a distance, silent and unmoved. You have felt in the mirror, in those moments when you catch your own eyes and wonder who's looking back, wonder when you became this person, wonder if you ever truly chose this face you show the world. This exhaustion does not come from doing too much. It comes from being someone you are not. It comes from the constant, invisible effort of holding up a mask, of maintaining a persona, of performing a self that was constructed not from your own depths, but from the expectations, fears, and fantasies of others. And the cruelest part, the part that makes this so difficult to see, is that you did not put on this mask consciously. You did not wake up one day and decide to be false. No, this mask grew on you slowly, cell by cell, year by year, beginning so early that you cannot remember a time before it. It grew as you learned what made your parents smile, what kept you safe at school, what earned you approval, what protected you from rejection. It grew as you absorbed the unspoken rules of your family, your culture, your gender, your class. It grew as you swallowed your own wildness, your own strangeness, your own inconvenient truths, and replaced them with something more palatable, more acceptable, more likely to be loved. And now, years later, you are tired. Not because you are weak, but because you have been strong in the wrong direction. You have been strong in the service of a life that is not yours. You have been disciplined in the maintenance of a self that does not reflect your soul. And your body, your psyche, your spirit, they are refusing to continue. Not out of laziness, out of wisdom. Carl Jung spent his life exploring the landscapes of the unconscious, mapping the territories where the true self hides when the false self takes the stage. He understood that we are not one unified being, but a multiplicity, a community of inner figures, voices, impulses, and images. And he understood that the persona, the mask we wear in the world, is necessary, even useful, but only when it remains flexible, only when it serves the deeper self rather than replacing it. When the persona becomes rigid, when it becomes the only self we know, when we lose contact with the living depths beneath the mask, that is when we begin to experience what Jung called the crisis of the psyche. That is when symptoms appear: depression, anxiety, addiction, and yes, what we casually dismiss as laziness. But Jung also understood something that most psychological systems overlook. He understood that these crises are not merely problems to be solved. They are initiations. They are the psyche's way of breaking down a structure that has become too small, too false, too suffocating. They are the soul's refusal to continue living a lie. And they are, in their own dark way, acts of love. The unconscious loves you too much to let you disappear into a false life. It loves you too much to let you spend your one existence performing a script written by someone else. And so it withdraws its energy. It makes you tired. It makes you resistant. It makes you unable to continue in the old way. Not to punish you, to save you. In this reflection, I want to share with you several signs, several inner shifts, several patterns that indicate you're not lazy, but spiritually exhausted from carrying a false self. These are not academic concepts. They are lived experiences. You may recognize yourself in some of them. You may feel a jolt of recognition, a whisper of yes. That is exactly what I have been feeling but could not name. And if you do, I invite you to stay with that recognition. Do not rush past it. Do not immediately try to fix it or change it or transcend it. Simply let it be seen. Because the first step in any real transformation is not action. It is awareness. It is the quiet, courageous act of looking at what is actually true, rather than what you wish were true or what you've been told should be true. And I will tell you this now, before we go deeper. If you stay with me until the end of this reflection, you may find that recent experiences begin to reinterpret themselves. Moments that felt like failure may reveal themselves as protection. Silences that felt like emptiness may reveal themselves as preparation. Losses that felt like endings may reveal themselves as clearings, as the necessary destruction that precedes any genuine becoming. Nothing in your life is random. Nothing is wasted. Even the years you feel you have lost to this exhaustion, to this fog, to this strange inability to move forward. Even those years have been doing something essential, something underground, something that will only make sense later when you look back and see the pattern. The first sign that you are carrying a false self, the first indication that your exhaustion is spiritual rather than physical, is a persistent sense of disconnection from your own desires. Not just a vague dissatisfaction, but something more fundamental. You find that you do not know what you want. When someone asks you, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What matters to you? You feel a blankness, a fog, a strange absence where your desire should be. Or worse, you feel a performance rising up, an automatic answer that sounds right, that fits the image, but that carries no real energy, no real pull, no real yes from the depths. This is not because you're indecisive or passive or lacking in ambition. This is because the false self does not have desires. It has scripts. It has roles. It has strategies for approval and safety and belonging. But it does not have the raw, irrational, alive wanting that comes from the true self. That kind of desire, the kind that moves through your body like heat, like hunger, like an animal knowing, that kind of desire has been buried under years of adaptation. You learned early that your real desires were inconvenient, too much, too strange, too likely to disappoint others or reveal your difference. And so you learned to replace them with acceptable substitutes. You learned to want what you were supposed to want. Success, recognition, security, comfort. And these are not bad things. But when they're pursued by the false self, they feel hollow. You achieve them and feel nothing. You reach the goal and wonder why the promised satisfaction never arrives. I remember a conversation I had years ago with someone who seemed, from the outside, to have everything. A good career, a stable relationship, a beautiful home. But when I asked him what he wanted next, what he was moving toward, he looked at me with this expression of quiet panic and said, "I do not know. I have done everything I was supposed to do, and now I do not know what I actually want." And then he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "It is like I've been following a map my whole life, and I just realized the map is for someone else's destination." That is what it feels like to carry a false self. You are always navigating by someone else's coordinates. And the exhaustion comes not from the journey itself, but from the constant inner split, the constant betrayal of your own compass. Your body knows. Your deeper self knows. It knows that you are moving in a direction that does not serve your becoming. And so it resists. It drags its feet. It makes you tired, not because it is lazy, because it is trying to stop you from walking further into a life that is not yours. And here's what makes this so difficult to see. The false self is not entirely false. It contains real parts of you, real talents, real values, real care. But it is organized around the wrong center. It is organized around the question, what will keep me safe? What will make me loved? What will prevent rejection? And that is a survival question, not a soul question. The true self is organized around a different center entirely. It is organized around the question, what is mine to do? What is mine to become? What is trying to be born through me? And that question does not care about safety. It does not care about approval. It cares about truth. It cares about alignment. It cares about the strange, specific, irreplaceable shape of your particular existence. When you begin to sense this disconnection from your own desires, when you begin to notice the blankness where your wanting should be, it is common to feel fear. It is common to think, if I do not know what I want, then who am I? And this is the fear that keeps many people locked in the false self for their entire lives. Because the false self, for all its exhaustion, is familiar. It is known. It has kept you alive this far. And the true self, the self that lives beneath the mask, is unknown. It is wild. It is unpredictable. It does not come with guarantees. And so the ego clings to the mask, even as the soul suffocates beneath it. But if you can stay with this fear, if you can let yourself not know for a while, something begins to shift. The blankness begins to feel less like emptiness and more like openness. The silence begins to feel less like absence and more like listening. And very slowly, very quietly, desires begin to return. Not the loud, performative desires of the false self, but the small, strange, specific desires of the true self. The desire to spend an afternoon doing something that serves no purpose. The desire to say no to an obligation that looks good on paper but feels wrong in your body. The desire to follow a curiosity that makes no sense, that fits no plan, that leads nowhere you can name. These small desires are the breadcrumbs. They are the way the true self speaks when it has been silent for a long time. And if you follow them, even just a little, even just enough to see where they lead, you begin to remember what it feels like to be moved by something real, something alive, something yours. The second sign, closely related but distinct, is a deep resistance to performing. Not stage performance, though it can include that, but the daily performance of being the person you have learned to be. You feel it in social situations where you used to be able to put on the right energy, say the right things, play the role that is expected of you. But now, something in you refuses. You feel a heaviness, a reluctance, a sense of, I cannot do this again. You find yourself canceling plans, avoiding conversations, withdrawing from contexts where the mask is required. And you judge yourself harshly for this. You think you are becoming antisocial, depressed, dysfunctional. But what if you are not breaking down? What if you're breaking open? This resistance to performing is not a rejection of connection. It is a rejection of false connection. It is your psyche saying, I cannot keep pretending. I cannot keep showing up as someone I am not. I cannot keep having conversations that touch nothing real, that exchange information but not truth, that maintain the surface while the depths go unspoken. And this is terrifying because so much of our social world is built on these performances. We are rewarded for being consistent, predictable, easy to categorize. We are rewarded for staying in our lane, playing our part, not disrupting the script. And when you begin to refuse that, when you begin to let the mask slip, people notice. They feel uncomfortable. They may pull away. They may accuse you of changing, of being difficult, of not being yourself. And the cruel irony is that you are, for the first time in a long time, beginning to be yourself. But they do not recognize the self because they only ever knew the mask. Jung called this the process of individuation, the gradual differentiation of the true self from the collective expectations, the inherited identities, the roles and scripts that were never truly yours. And he was very clear that this process is not comfortable. It is not socially rewarded. It often involves a period of isolation, of withdrawal, of what looks from the outside like regression or breakdown. But from the inside, it is something else entirely. It is a return to the parts of yourself that were exiled, that were deemed unacceptable, that were sacrificed for the sake of belonging. And this return is not smooth. It is not linear. It involves grief, rage, confusion, and yes, exhaustion. Because you are not just letting go of a mask. You are letting go of an entire world that was built around that mask. You are letting go of relationships that only worked when you played your part. You are letting go of identities that gave you a sense of place, even if that place was too small, too rigid, too false. I think of this resistance to performing as a kind of sacred refusal. Your soul is refusing to continue the lie, and it is using the only language it has, the language of the body, the language of energy, the language of I cannot, not I will not, which would be a conscious choice, but I cannot, which is deeper, which comes from a place beyond will, beyond decision, beyond the ego's control. And when you try to force yourself to perform anyway, when you push through the resistance, when you shame yourself into showing up as the old self one more time, you feel the cost. You feel it in the heaviness that follows, in the days it takes to recover, in the sense of having betrayed something essential. And eventually, if you are paying attention, you begin to realize that the cost is too high. You begin to realize that protecting your energy, protecting your truth, protecting the fragile emergence of your real self is more important than maintaining the comfort of others. This does not mean you become cruel or selfish or indifferent. It means you become discerning. You begin to ask, where's my presence truly wanted, truly met, truly seen? And where am I simply filling a role, playing a part, maintaining an image? And you begin to choose differently. You begin to say no more often. You begin to disappoint people. You begin to let others be uncomfortable with your changes. And this too is exhausting because it goes against everything you were taught. But it is a different kind of exhaustion. It is not the exhaustion of self-betrayal. It is the exhaustion of growth, of stretching, of becoming larger than the container that held you. And that kind of exhaustion, hard as it is, has a quality of aliveness to it. It hurts, but it does not deaden. It challenges, but does not diminish. The third sign is a growing intolerance for noise. And by noise, I do not mean only literal sound, though that can be part of it. I mean the constant input, the endless stimulation, the barrage of information, opinions, images, demands that characterize modern life. You find that you cannot tolerate the news the way you used to. You cannot scroll through social media without feeling drained. You cannot listen to certain conversations, certain topics, certain energies without feeling something and you shut down or recoil. And again, you judge yourself. You think you're becoming avoidant, escapist, disconnected from the world. But what if you're not disconnecting from the world? What if you are disconnecting from the false world, the constructed world, the world of surfaces and performances and manufactured urgencies, so that you can reconnect with something deeper, something slower, something more real? When you are carrying a false self, you need the noise. You need the distraction, because the noise drowns out the inner voice that is trying to tell you the truth. It drowns out the discomfort, the dissonance, the quiet knowing that something is wrong. And so you fill your days with busyness, your mind with content, your senses with stimulation. Not because you are curious or engaged, but because you are afraid of the silence. You are afraid of what you might hear if you stop. You are afraid of the grief that is waiting, the rage that is waiting, the longing that is waiting. You are afraid that if you let yourself feel what is actually true, you will not be able to continue in the life you have built. And you are right. You will not. That is the point. The intolerance for noise is your psyche creating space. It is clearing the field. It is saying enough. Enough input. Enough opinion. Enough distraction. I need silence. I need stillness. I need to hear my own voice again. And when you begin to honor this need, when you begin to protect your inner space from the constant invasion of the external world, something remarkable happens. At first, the silence is uncomfortable. It is loud with all the things you have been avoiding. You feel restless, anxious, bored. You reach for your phone, for a task, for anything to fill the space. But if you can resist that impulse, if you can sit with the discomfort, the silence begins to change. It begins to feel less like emptiness and more like presence. It begins to feel less like isolation and more like intimacy. Intimacy with yourself, with the parts of you that have been drowned out by the noise, with the inner life that has been waiting patiently for you to return. Jung spoke of the importance of active imagination, of creating space for the unconscious to speak, not through effort or analysis, but through receptivity, through listening, through allowing images and feelings and impulses to arise without immediately judging them or controlling them or translating them into rational language. And this requires silence. It requires a kind of inner hospitality, a willingness to welcome whatever emerges, even if it is strange, even if it is uncomfortable, even if it contradicts the story you have been telling yourself. This is not passive. It is profoundly active, but it is a different kind of action. It is the action of paying attention, of bearing witness, of saying to your own depths, I am here, I am listening, I will not turn away. And what you discover when you begin to spend time in the silence is that you are not empty, you are not boring, you are not the blank, exhausted shell you feared you had become. You are full of images, memories, longings, fears, dreams that have been waiting for your attention. Full of a life that has been living itself beneath the surface, beneath the performance, beneath the false self. And this fullness is not always comfortable. It is not always pretty. It includes the shadow, the parts of you that you have disowned, the anger and grief and desire that you learned to suppress. But it is real. It is alive. It is yours. And in its presence, the false self begins to lose its power. It begins to feel less like who you are and more like a costume you once wore, a role you once played, a survival strategy that is no longer necessary. The fourth sign is a profound fatigue around achievement. You used to be motivated by goals, by progress, by the satisfaction of checking things off a list, by the validation that comes from external success. But now, the thought of achieving one more thing, of reaching one more milestone, of proving yourself one more time, fills you with a kind of dread. Not because you are lazy, but because you have begun to sense, perhaps unconsciously, that the game you have been playing is rigged, that the goals you have been chasing were never yours to begin with, that the finish line keeps moving, and even when you cross it, the promised fulfillment never arrives. You are tired of achieving because achievement, in the way you have been taught to pursue it, is a function of the false self. It is about proving your worth, earning your place, justifying your existence. And the true self does not need to prove anything. It simply is. This is one of the most disorienting shifts because our culture is so deeply invested in the narrative of achievement, of progress, of constant growth and improvement. We are taught that our value is determined by our productivity, our success, our ability to contribute and compete and climb. And when you begin to lose interest in that game, when you begin to feel the emptiness at the heart of it, you can feel like you're losing your grip on reality. You can feel like you're failing, falling behind, wasting your potential. But what if you're not falling behind? What if you're falling awake? What if you're waking up to the fact that your worth is not something you earn, but something you are? What if you're waking up to the truth that your life is not a project to be optimized, but a mystery to be lived? Jung understood that the second half of life, if it is lived consciously, involves a fundamental shift in values. The first half of life is about building the ego, establishing yourself in the world, achieving, acquiring, proving. And this is necessary. This is not wrong. But if you continue to live by those values into the second half of life, you end up exhausted, empty, chasing goals that no longer feed you. The second half of life is about something else. It is about depth, about meaning, about the inner work of integrating the shadow, of reclaiming the disowned parts, of moving from the ego's agenda to the soul's agenda. And this shift does not happen smoothly. It often begins with a crisis, a breakdown, a loss that forces you to question everything you thought you knew. And one of the first things to crumble is the old relationship to achievement. You may find that projects you used to care about no longer interest you, that ambitions you once held now feel hollow, that the approval you once sought now feels irrelevant. And this can be frightening, especially if your identity has been built around being capable, productive, successful. But this loss of interest is not a loss of self. It is a loss of false self. It is the ego's attachment to external validation beginning to loosen. And in that loosening, space opens up for something else, for a different kind of doing, a doing that comes not from the need to prove, but from the desire to create, to express, to serve something larger than your own survival. This kind of doing does not feel like effort. It feels like flow. It feels like alignment. It feels like you're being moved by something rather than pushing yourself forward. And it is not always productive in the conventional sense. It does not always lead to visible results, but it is deeply satisfying in a way that achievement never was, because it comes from the true self, from the place in you that knows what it is here to do, even if that knowing cannot be translated into a 5-year plan. The fifth sign is a strange relationship with time. You feel like you're moving too slowly, like everyone else is progressing while you're stuck, like you're wasting your life in this fog of exhaustion and uncertainty. But at the same time, you feel rushed, pressured, like you're running out of time, like you should have figured this out already. This paradox, this sense of being both too slow and too late, is a hallmark of the transition from false self to true self. Because the false self operates on linear time, on deadlines and milestones, and the fear of falling behind. But the true self operates on cyclical time, on seasons and rhythms, and the organic unfolding of a life that cannot be rushed. And when you're caught between these two modes of time, you feel disoriented, unmoored, like you do not know where you are or where you're going. This disorientation is necessary. It is part of the process. Because in order to step out of the false self's timeline, you have to let go of the illusion that you are in control, that you can plan your way to wholeness. That transformation is something you can schedule and manage. You cannot. Transformation happens in its own time. It happens underground, in the dark, in the silence, in the spaces between your efforts. It happens when you stop trying to make it happen and simply allow yourself to be where you are, even if where you are feels like nowhere. Even if where you are feels like a wasteland, a waiting room, a place of suspension where nothing is clear and nothing is moving. This is the liminal space, the threshold, the place between who you were and who you are becoming. And it is deeply uncomfortable because the ego hates uncertainty. The ego wants to know, to plan, to control. But the soul is comfortable with mystery. The soul knows that not knowing is fertile. That confusion is the beginning of clarity. That the slowness you are experiencing is not a problem to be solved, but a pace to be honored. Jung spoke of the process of individuation as a journey that cannot be rushed. He spoke of the importance of patience, of allowing the unconscious to do its work, of trusting that the psyche knows what it is doing even when the ego is lost. And he warned against the temptation to force the process, to try to achieve wholeness through willpower or technique or spiritual bypassing. Because the true self cannot be constructed, it can only be uncovered. It is already there, beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the false self, waiting. And the uncovering happens slowly, through attention, through presence, through the willingness to sit with discomfort and not immediately try to fix it or escape it or understand it. It happens through dreams, through synchronicities, through the small moments of recognition when something inside you says, yes, this is true. And you cannot schedule those moments. You cannot make them happen. You can only create the conditions for them to arise. And one of those conditions is time. Not time as a resource to be managed, but time as a space to be inhabited. Time is the medium in which transformation occurs. When you begin to shift your relationship with time, when you begin to trust the slowness, something in you relaxes. The urgency loosens. The pressure eases. You begin to see that you are not behind, because there is nowhere to be ahead of. You begin to see that your life is not a race, but a spiral, and that you are not moving forward in a straight line, but circling back to the same themes, the same wounds, the same questions, but each time from a deeper place, with more awareness, with more capacity to hold the complexity. And this circling is not failure. It is the way the psyche heals. It is the way integration happens, layer by layer, round by round, until one day you realize that the question that used to torment you no longer has the same charge, that the wound that used to define you has become a source of wisdom, that the exhaustion that used to feel like death has become a doorway into life. The sixth sign, and perhaps the most painful, is a sense of profound loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, though that can be part of it, but the loneliness of being unseen, of carrying a truth inside you that you cannot speak because you do not have the language for it yet, or because the people around you are not ready to hear it, or because you are afraid that if you reveal yourself, you will be rejected, misunderstood, pathologized. This is the loneliness of the true self beginning to emerge in a world that only knows the false self. It is the loneliness of waking up while everyone around you is still asleep. And it is excruciating because we are relational beings. We need to be seen, to be met, to be recognized. And when the part of us that is waking up cannot find that recognition, we feel isolated in a way that goes beyond the physical. We feel existentially alone. This loneliness is a kind of dark initiation. It is the soul's way of separating you from the collective, from the consensus reality, from the safety of the group, so that you can find your own ground, your own voice, your own truth. And it is supposed to feel like dying, because in a sense, it is. The old self, the self that belonged, the self that fit, is dying. And the new self, the true self, has not yet fully formed. You are in the space between, the no man's land, the wilderness. And in this wilderness, you are alone. Not because there is something wrong with you, but because this part of the journey can only be walked alone. No one can do it for you. No one can tell you who you are. No one can give you permission to be yourself. That permission has to come from within. And finding it, claiming it, living it, requires a kind of solitude that our culture does not value, does not understand, does not make space for. But here is the paradox. This loneliness, as painful as it is also the birthplace of authenticity. Because when you can no longer rely on external validation, when you can no longer perform for approval, when you are stripped of the mirrors that used to tell you who you are forced to turn inward. You are forced to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I value when no one is applauding? What is true for me, regardless of whether it is true for anyone else? And these questions, these raw, unmediated encounters with your own being, are the foundation of the true self. They are the ground from which a real life can grow. Not a life that looks good from the outside, but a life that feels true from the inside. A life that is yours. And what you may discover, if you can bear the loneliness long enough, is that you are not as alone as you thought. That there are others who are walking the same path, who are asking the same questions, who are feeling the same exhaustion and resistance and refusal. You may not find them in the places you used to look. They are not at the parties, the networking events, the social gatherings where the false self thrives. They are in the quiet places, the margins, the spaces where depth is valued over performance, where truth is valued over comfort, where the messy, complicated, unfinished process of becoming is honored rather than hidden. And when you do find them, when you do encounter someone who sees you, who recognizes the real you beneath the mask, the relief is immense. Because you realize that you're not crazy. You are not broken. You are simply awake. And being awake in a world that is largely asleep is lonely. But it is also the only way to live a life that is truly your own. The seventh sign is a loss of faith in the old stories. The narratives that used to organize your life, that used to give you direction and meaning, no longer hold. Maybe it is the story of success, the belief that if you work hard enough, you will be rewarded, you will be happy, you will be fulfilled. Maybe it is the story of love, the belief that the right relationship will complete you, will heal your wounds, will make you whole. Maybe it is the story of progress, the belief that humanity is moving forward, that things are getting better, that your efforts matter in some grand collective project. Whatever the story, it has crumbled. And in its absence, you feel unmoored, adrift, like you have lost the map and the compass and the destination all at once. This loss of faith is not cynicism. It is not nihilism. It is disillusionment in the most literal sense. The illusions are falling away. The false stories, the inherited beliefs, the cultural myths that promised more than they could deliver, are being seen for what they are. And this seeing is painful because those stories gave you a sense of order, a sense of purpose, a sense of knowing where you fit. But they were not true, or rather, they were true for the false self, for the part of you that needed to believe in a simple, linear, controllable world. But they are not true for the true self, for the part of you that knows that life is complex, mysterious, tragic, beautiful, and utterly beyond the ego's ability to manage or understand. Jung wrote about the importance of myth, of living story, of having a narrative that connects you to something larger than yourself. But he also warned against living someone else's myth, against adopting a story that does not come from your own depths. And he understood that the transition from a false myth to a true myth involves a period of mythlessness, a time when you have no story, no framework, no guiding narrative. And this time is terrifying. It feels like chaos. It feels like meaninglessness. But it is necessary, because you cannot receive a new story until you have let go of the old one. You cannot hear the voice of your own soul until you have stopped listening to the voices of the collective, the culture, the family, the false self. And the new story, when it comes, does not come from outside. It does not come from a book or a teacher or a tradition, though those can be guides, can be companions. It comes from within. It emerges slowly, through dreams, through intuition, through the patterns and synchronicities that begin to appear when you are paying attention. It is not a story you choose. It is a story that chooses you. It is the story that your life has been trying to tell all along, beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the false self. And when you begin to live this story, when you begin to align your outer life with your inner truth, the exhaustion begins to lift. Not all at once, not completely, but enough that you can feel the difference. Enough that you can feel the energy returning, not as a manic push, but as a steady flow, a quiet yes, a sense of being moved by something real. The 8th sign is a heightened sensitivity to inauthenticity. You can feel it now, in a way you could not before. You can feel when someone is performing, when a conversation is surface, when an environment is false, and you can no longer tolerate it the way you used to. You cannot fake enthusiasm. You cannot pretend to care about things that do not matter to you. You cannot smile through interactions that feel hollow. And this sensitivity can make you feel difficult, prickly, hard to please. But it is not a flaw. It is a sign that you are becoming more aligned with your own truth. It is a sign that the false self is losing its grip, and the true self is becoming more discerning, more protective of its energy, more unwilling to compromise. This sensitivity is a kind of spiritual immune system. It is your psyche's way of protecting you from further contamination, from further investment in what is not real. And it is essential because as you begin to shed the false self, you become more vulnerable, more permeable, more open. And if you do not develop this discernment, if you do not learn to say no to what is false, you'll be pulled back into the old patterns, the old performances, the old exhaustion. So the sensitivity, uncomfortable as it is a gift. It is a compass. It is telling you where you belong and where you do not. It is telling you who sees you and who only sees the mask. It is telling you what is worth your energy and what is a drain. And as you learn to trust this sensitivity, as you learn to honor it rather than override it, your life begins to reorganize itself. Relationships that were based on the false self begin to fall away. Not always dramatically. Sometimes they just fade, lose their charge, become less central. And this can be sad. It can feel like loss. But it is also necessary because you're making space. Space for relationships that can meet you where you actually are, not where you used to be. Space for connections that are based on truth rather than performance, on depth rather than surface, on mutual recognition rather than mutual projection. And these relationships, when they come, feel different. They feel easier, not because they are conflict-free, but because they are real. They feel nourishing, not because they are always comfortable, but because they allow you to be yourself. The 9th sign, closely related, is a deep need for solitude. Not as escape, though it can feel that way at first, but as a necessity. You need time alone, time without demands, without performance, without the need to manage anyone else's feelings or expectations. Time to simply be. And this need can be confusing, especially if you used to be social, used to draw energy from being around others. But what has changed is not that you have become antisocial. What has changed is that you can no longer tolerate being around others in the old way, the false way, the way that required you to perform. And until you find people who can meet you in a real way, solitude feels safer, truer, more aligned. This need for solitude is the soul's way of creating a container for the inner work. Because the work of shedding the false self, of integrating the shadow, of listening to the unconscious, requires space. It requires silence. It requires a kind of inner attention that is impossible when you are constantly engaged with the external world. And so you withdraw, not forever, but for a season, for as long as it takes. And in this withdrawal, in this solitude, you begin to meet yourself. Not the self you show to others, but the self that exists when no one is watching. The self that has been waiting patiently for you to come home. And this self is not always easy to be with. It carries grief, rage, shame, longing. It carries all the parts of you that were exiled, that were deemed unacceptable, that were sacrificed for the sake of belonging. And meeting these parts, welcoming them back, is painful. It is the work of a lifetime, but it is also the work that makes a life worth living. Because it is the work of becoming whole. Not perfect, not healed in the sense of having no wounds, but whole in the sense of no longer abandoning yourself, no longer splitting off the parts that do not fit, no longer living in exile from your own depths. Jung called this the integration of shadow, and he was clear that it is not optional, not if you want to live conscious life. The shadow, the disowned parts, the parts you have been taught to hate or fear or deny, do not go away just because you ignore them. They live in the unconscious. They influence your behavior, your relationships, your choices, in ways you do not see. They leak out in projections, in compulsions, in the very things you judge most harshly in others. And the only way to reclaim your energy, your wholeness, your freedom, is to turn toward the shadow, to see it, to own it, to integrate it. And this work, this deep, uncomfortable, humbling work, requires solitude. It requires the willingness to be alone with yourself, with all of yourself, without distraction, without escape, without the comfort of the mask. The 10th sign is a growing sense of the sacred in the ordinary. As the false self begins to crumble, as the noise begins to quiet, as the performance begins to fall away, you start to notice things you did not notice before. The quality of light in the late afternoon, the way a tree moves in the wind, the texture of silence, the feeling of water on your skin. These small, ordinary moments begin to carry a weight, a presence, a sense of something more. Not more in the sense of supernatural or mystical, though it can include that, but more in the sense of real, of alive, of maturing in a way that the big achievements, the grand narratives, the external validations never did. This shift in perception is a sign that you're coming back to your senses, literally. The false self lives in the head, in concepts, in abstractions, in the future and the past. It is always somewhere else, always planning, always worrying, always performing. But the true self lives in the body, in the present moment, in the direct, unmediated experience of being alive. And as you begin to inhabit this self, as you begin to drop out of the constant mental chatter and into the sensory reality of your existence, the world becomes new again. It becomes vivid, textured, full, not because it has changed, but because you are finally here to see it. This is what the mystics have always known, that the sacred is not somewhere else, not in some distant heaven or future enlightenment. It is here, now, in the ordinary, the mundane, the overlooked, in the breath, in the body, in the simple fact of being. And when you begin to live from this awareness, when you begin to orient your life around presence rather than performance, around being rather than doing, the exhaustion begins to transform. It is no longer the exhaustion of carrying a false self. It becomes the exhaustion of shedding, of releasing, of letting go of everything that is not essential. And this exhaustion, though still tiring, has a different quality. It is clean. It is purposeful. It is the exhaustion of a snake shedding its skin, of a seed breaking open, of a life being born. Now, as we come to the end of this reflection, I want to return to where we began. What if you're not lazy? What if you're spiritually exhausted from carrying a false self? What if everything you have been judging yourself for, the resistance, the withdrawal, the inability to continue in the old way, is not a failure but a refusal of your soul to keep living a lie, a refusal of your deeper self to keep performing a script that was never yours, a refusal of your body, your psyche, your spirit, to keep investing energy in a life that does not reflect who you truly are. This refusal is not comfortable. It is not convenient. It does not make you popular or productive or easy to understand, but it is necessary. It is the beginning of the journey home to yourself, home to the parts of you that have been waiting patiently for you to remember them, home to the life that is yours to live, not the life you were told to live, not the life that looks good from the outside, but the life that feels true from the inside. And this journey, this slow, difficult, beautiful journey, is not something you do alone. You are supported, even when you cannot see it. You are held, even when you feel lost. You are being guided, not by external voices, but by the quiet, persistent, undeniable voice of your own soul. And so, I invite you, if any of this has resonated, if any of this has touched something true in you, to begin paying attention. Not to fix yourself, not to change yourself, but simply to notice. Notice when you feel the resistance. Notice when you feel the exhaustion. Notice when the false self is asking you to perform and something deeper is saying no. Notice when you are drawn to silence, to solitude, to the small sacred moments that the world overlooks. Notice when you feel the loneliness of being unseen, and notice when you feel the relief of being met. Notice the patterns, the synchronicities, the dreams, the small signs that your life is trying to show you something, trying to lead you somewhere, trying to call you home. You do not need to understand it all at once. You do not need to have a plan. You do not need to know where this is leading. You only need to be willing to see what is true, to honor what is real, to trust that the exhaustion you feel is not a problem to be solved, but a message to be heard. And the message is this: you are not lazy. You are waking up. You are shedding a skin that no longer fits. You are being called into a larger life, a truer life, a life that is yours. And it is hard, and it is slow, and it is worth it. If this reflection has served you, if it has helped you see yourself more clearly, I invite you to like this video, to subscribe to this channel, to share it with someone who might need to hear these words. And I